The riverside bridge soared above the Colorado River like a monument to human engineering. 100 feet of steel and concrete spanning foaming spring waters that surged below with reckless force. It was the kind of place people visited for the view, never imagining they'd become part of a life-or-death moment. On this sunny May evening, Rebecca Morgan, a 34-year-old veterinarian, was walking her 3-month-old German Shepherd puppy, Atlas. The pup was finally cleared to explore the world beyond their backyard, his vaccinations nearly complete. This was supposed to be a peaceful stroll. "Easy, Atlas," Rebecca murmured, gently tugging on the leash as the excited puppy bounced forward, oversized paws slapping against the concrete with clumsy joy. He was still growing into his body, ears too big, legs too long, a walking bundle of fur and wonder. The bridge bustled with foot traffic. Joggers, tourists, cyclists. It was a vibrant scene. Rebecca paused midway across, admiring the view. Atlas sat at her feet, tail wagging like a metronome set to joy. Then, in an instant, everything changed. A cyclist whipped around a curve too fast, weaving to avoid a group of pedestrians. The sudden blur of movement spooked Atlas. The puppy flinched backward, eyes wide, and jerked against the leash. The collar slipped. The leash flew from Rebecca's hand. "Atlas! Stay!" she shouted, but panic had hijacked his instincts. The terrified pup backed up, straight into the pedestrian barrier. And fate delivered its cruelest twist. A storm-damaged section of the lower railing had been overlooked during maintenance. The opening, just wide enough, swallowed Atlas's hind legs as he scrambled for footing, front paws clawing at the ledge. Rebecca lunged. Fingers brushed his fur, but couldn't hold. "No!" Her scream tore across the bridge as Atlas tumbled over the edge. The river below surged with spring melt, pockmarked by jagged rocks and deadly currents. The fall alone should have killed him. For a 15-pound puppy, it might as well have been off a cliff. Nearby, 28-year-old kayaker Michael Chen had just been preparing to launch into the current when he saw the puppy plummet. He didn't hesitate. In one fluid motion, he shoved his kayak into the water and paddled with everything he had. Meanwhile, Rebecca was sprinting to the river's edge, lungs burning, heart screaming. Every beat echoed a single truth: he's gone. As bystanders gathered in horrified silence above, eyes fixed on the water, a miracle breached the surface. 30 yards downstream, a small, soaked head emerged, ears flattened, paws flailing, gasping for air. Atlas was alive. But the river wasn't done with him yet. Michael Chen gritted his teeth, digging his paddle into the rapids. The current was fierce, swirling with whitecaps that threatened to spin his kayak like a toy. His eyes locked onto the struggling puppy, who was now being pulled rapidly downstream. "Hold on, little guy," he shouted, knowing the pup couldn't hear, but willing him to stay afloat anyway. Atlas was giving everything he had. His tiny limbs were no match for the raging current, and exhaustion was setting in fast. His head dipped once, then again. The third time he vanished under the water, Rebecca's heart stopped. On shore, she was sprinting, stumbling over rocks and roots, her eyes never leaving the river. She whispered a single word over and over: "Please." Atlas surfaced again, coughing, sputtering, barely paddling now. His limbs moved without rhythm, his head barely above water. Michael was nearly there, less than 15 feet away. But a new danger loomed. Up ahead, a submerged log jammed against boulders formed a natural strainer, a death trap that could snare even experienced swimmers. Jagged branches reached up from the water like claws. Atlas was heading straight for it. And then, the river blinked. At least, that's how it felt. A floating branch suddenly veered off course, against the current, and drifted between Atlas and the strainer. It didn't make sense. It shouldn't have moved like that. But it did. The puppy slammed into the drifting wood instead, bouncing off and landing momentarily in calmer water. Michael didn't question the physics-defying moment. He took it. "Grab on," he yelled, pushing his paddle forward. Whether by instinct or sheer desperation, Atlas latched onto the paddle with his front paws, claws scraping the blade. Michael shifted sideways, water rushing past as he cradled the waterlogged puppy and hauled him into the kayak. But the river had one last fight to give. A hydraulic wave slammed into the side of the kayak, tipping it dangerously. Michael threw himself over Atlas, shielding the trembling puppy with his body. That's when the impossible happened again. Atlas stopped panicking. The wild, frightened puppy froze, not in fear, but in perfect stillness, as if he understood what Michael was doing. He pressed himself tightly against his rescuer's chest. Their balance held. The kayak rocked through the wave, and came out the other side, upright. Moments later, they reached the shallows. Rebecca was already waist-deep in the water, hands trembling. Michael handed the soaked bundle of fur to her. Atlas whimpered once, then collapsed into her arms, utterly spent. His tail gave a single weak wag. "You're alive," she whispered, choking on tears, cradling him to her chest. Emergency vehicles arrived minutes later. One of the responders, Dr. James Wilson, a fellow veterinarian, had been in the area when the 911 call came through. He joined Rebecca on the shoreline, disbelief all over his face. They examined the puppy right there on the bank, fully expecting the worst. Broken bones, internal bleeding, trauma. But Atlas? He had none of it. "This doesn't add up," Wilson muttered, checking him again. "A fall like that, this puppy should be shattered. No fractures, no bleeding, not even a limp. Just minor scratches, borderline hypothermia, and exhaustion. That's it. This shouldn't be possible," Rebecca whispered, wrapping him in emergency blankets. "But here you are." What they didn't realize was that Atlas's survival wasn't just miraculous. It was the start of something so much bigger, something no one could explain, but no one would be able to deny. That night, Atlas lay bundled in soft blankets at Rebecca's veterinary clinic, surrounded by warmth, care, and disbelief. By all medical logic, he should have been in critical condition, or worse. Instead, he was peacefully resting, eyes fluttering, breath steady. Rebecca stayed by his side the entire night, watching the gentle rise and fall of his chest as if trying to convince herself it was real. By morning, the impossible became even more undeniable. Atlas stood. He stretched, yawned, and walked, wobbly but alert, over to his food bowl and began eating like nothing had ever happened. His tail wagged slowly at the sound of Rebecca's voice. When Michael came to visit, Atlas perked up instantly, ears flicking forward, tail thumping against the floor. The puppy licked his rescuer's hand with familiar enthusiasm. "Looks like someone remembers who pulled him out of the river," Rebecca smiled. "Here's your miracle," Michael said softly. "No," she replied. "You're his." They both laughed, but inside, neither of them were laughing. They were trying to make sense of it, of how a 15-pound puppy could fall 10 stories, survive bone-crushing impact, endure drowning and hypothermia, and walk away. "It wasn't just that the river spared him," Michael said, hesitating. "That branch, it moved toward him. Against the current. I've been kayaking this river for years. I've never seen anything like that." Rebecca didn't respond, because she'd been thinking the exact same thing. The first clue that something had changed came the next afternoon. Atlas was lying quietly near the clinic window when, suddenly, he stiffened. His ears swiveled forward. His body went still. "What is it?" Rebecca asked. He didn't move. Moments later, thunder rolled across the sky. She glanced out the window, startled. Black clouds had begun to gather, but the forecast had been clear skies all day. He sensed the storm before it formed. Over the next few days, Atlas began to act different. Not in obvious ways. He was still a puppy, still played, still begged for snacks, but there were small things, unmistakable things. He'd walk to the door 10 seconds before the bell rang. Stand by his water bowl moments before it was empty. More than once, he would nudge Rebecca's phone toward her, right before it rang. It's just coincidence, she told herself. But she didn't really believe it anymore. 2 weeks after the fall, Rebecca took Atlas for a walk back along the river, avoiding the bridge, but returning to the place where it all began. The shoreline was quiet, safe, until Atlas froze. His body went rigid. His ears locked forward. Then, without warning, he bolted, tearing the leash from Rebecca's grasp. "Atlas!" she shouted, chasing after him. But he didn't stop. He ran straight for a dense thicket of reeds near the water's edge, barking with growing urgency. When Rebecca caught up, she saw him digging furiously into the mud, whining with distress. And then, she heard it. The faintest mewing sound. Kneeling beside him, she pushed aside the debris and gasped. A plastic bag. Inside, soaked and shivering, were 3 newborn kittens, barely a week old. Someone had dumped them in the water, left to drown. Rebecca didn't hesitate. She scooped them into her jacket, heart pounding. "How did you know?" she whispered, staring at Atlas. The puppy sat back, breathing hard, eyes locked on the fragile lives he had just saved. That evening, with the kittens stabilized in incubators, Rebecca sat beside him, hand resting on his head. This isn't luck, she thought. This is something else entirely. 1 month after his fall, Atlas had grown, but not just in size. His body was maturing into the signature black and tan of a German shepherd, his limbs gaining strength and coordination. But what drew Rebecca's attention wasn't his physique. It was the way he watched the world. Like he understood more than he should. Rebecca started keeping a journal, documenting every strange occurrence, every moment that didn't fit within the normal boundaries of puppy behavior. And the pattern that emerged was undeniable. Atlas could sense things before they happened. He would react to people's distress before they showed any outward signs. He would lead Rebecca to animals that were injured but hadn't made a sound. And most striking of all, he never tracked with his nose. It was something deeper, something else. Dr. Wilson, initially skeptical, had his mind changed during a routine appointment. A cat named Shadow was on the exam table, seemingly healthy. Atlas suddenly became agitated, whining, pawing at the table, refusing to back away. "What's gotten into him?" Wilson asked. Rebecca didn't hesitate. "Check again. Something's wrong." Wilson ran a second series of tests, and froze. "No way," he whispered. Shadow had an abdominal obstruction. No symptoms yet. Nothing even a trained vet could have seen this early. "There's no clinical sign of this," Wilson murmured. "This could have killed her within days." But he knew, Rebecca finished, "before any of us did." Word began to spread. It started small. Neighbors sharing stories. A curious reporter from the regional paper dropped by. The headline that followed? "The Miracle Puppy of Riverside Bridge." The article featured photos of Atlas, quotes from Rebecca and Michael, and testimonials from people who had seen his strange behavior firsthand. That's when the phone calls started. Journalists, researchers, curiosity seekers. Rebecca shut most of it down. She had no interest in turning Atlas into a spectacle. But Michael posed a question she couldn't ignore. Do you think it started at the river? Should we go back? So they did. Standing once again near the riverbank that nearly took his life, Atlas didn't hesitate. He walked to the edge, calm, intent. And then he stopped watching the water and turned suddenly toward a family setting up a picnic nearby. Without warning, he sprinted toward them, barking frantically. Atlas! Rebecca called, chasing him. I'm so sorry. But then she saw it. A young boy was pulling open a snack container. Inside, chocolate-covered nuts, deadly to dogs. The boy had already reached to offer one to the family's Labrador. Stop! Rebecca shouted, just in time. That's toxic to dogs. The parents froze, stunned. The container had been sealed. Atlas had been 30 feet away. There was no way he could have seen or smelled the chocolate. How did he know? The mother asked, staring at the dog like he wasn't just a dog anymore. That evening, Dr. Wilson came to Rebecca's clinic. His tone was serious. We need help. Real researchers. Someone who understands canine cognition. This could change everything we thought we knew about animal perception. Rebecca agreed. It was time to bring in an expert. Dr. Elenina Reeves, a renowned specialist in canine cognition from Colorado State University, was contacted. Her resume included decades of behavioral research, cutting-edge neural mapping studies, and a global reputation for separating myth from measurable science. But even she wasn't prepared for Atlas. You're telling me this dog senses events before they happen? She asked during their first meeting, visibly skeptical. Not just that, Rebecca replied. He finds people, animals, medical conditions, sometimes before there are symptoms. Dr. Reeves blinked, then said simply, show me. What followed during that week of observation stunned even her. Hidden objects behind barriers? Atlas located them with unerring accuracy, detecting oncoming phone calls or visitors before any signal was present. Repeated, verified, documented. Emotional distress from individuals outside the room? He responded to it like it was his own. This puppy isn't just intelligent, Dr. Reeves said, flipping through her test logs. He's functioning on a level of perception we haven't documented in any species. Not like this. And then she paused, frowning at her notes. The fall. It didn't just spare him. I think it changed him. By the time Atlas reached 5 months of age, his name had gone far beyond Riverside. The original newspaper article was picked up by national media outlets. TV stations called. Researchers emailed. The veterinary clinic was overwhelmed with inquiries. Rebecca, fiercely protective, set firm boundaries. No public displays. No experiments that would stress him. Atlas's well-being came first, no matter what. But she also couldn't ignore the truth. This dog was saving lives. He had already detected a hidden heart condition in a patient, warned of a potential fire caused by a faulty outlet, and intervened in small emergencies before they became disasters. And the most dramatic rescue was still to come. It was a warm Saturday afternoon at Lake Carson, the first real taste of summer, and the shoreline was packed. Families sprawled on towels, kids splashed in the shallows, and barbecues filled the air with the smell of smoke and sunblock. Rebecca brought Atlas for what was meant to be a simple training session. He was working on basic obedience drills. Sit, stay, heel, and performing them with focus, despite the chaotic environment. Then he stopped. Mid-command, Atlas went completely still. His ears pivoted. His eyes locked on the water. A second later, he bolted. Atlas! Rebecca called after him, but he didn't look back. He weaved between sunbathers, past startled children and picnic baskets, and charged straight into the lake. People began shouting. Out in the water, about 50 yards from shore, a group of teenagers had been swimming. One of them was now screaming for help. A girl was gone. She was right here, one of them cried, pointing to the surface. She just vanished. Before the lifeguards even made it to their posts, Atlas was already swimming with powerful, precise strokes. His lean body cut through the waves like he'd done it 100 times before. Rebecca sprinted after him to the water's edge. Atlas reached the area where the girl had gone under, dove without hesitation, and reappeared moments later. In his mouth, clamped gently between his teeth, was a piece of soaked fabric. The girl's shirt. Her limp body floated beside him, face barely above the waterline. She was unconscious, having suffered a seizure while swimming. Her friends hadn't even seen her go under. There had been no scream, no splash. Atlas held her there, treading water, keeping her head above the surface until the lifeguards finally reached them. Paramedics raced in. CPR began immediately. And minutes later, a miracle. She lived. He knew exactly where she was. One of the lifeguards whispered afterward, shaking his head. She didn't even make a sound. We had no idea where to look. But Atlas did. The story hit social media before the sun had set. Footage from dozens of phones showed the moment the dog dove into the lake, and the moment he surfaced with the girl. The video went viral overnight. National networks picked it up. The miracle puppy was no longer just a local legend. He was now a national headline. Interview requests flooded in. Research institutes offered enormous grants to study him. Sponsors called. Networks asked for exclusives. Rebecca was overwhelmed, but determined. She wasn't going to let the world exploit him. That's when Dr. Reeves stepped in. Together, they created a protocol. Access would be limited. Atlas's well-being would come first. But research could continue, on their terms. His abilities are evolving, Dr. Reeves noted in one of her weekly assessments. The range is growing. And so is the accuracy. They didn't know it yet, but the most astonishing proof of that was just around the corner. It happened on an ordinary weeknight. Atlas had just finished his dinner, tail wagging lazily, when something changed. Without warning, he stiffened, ears perked, body low, eyes locked on Rebecca. Then, like a shot, he sprinted to her side. Not barking, not panicking, but urgent, dead serious. Rebecca had learned to read that look. When Atlas was like this, it meant go. Now. She grabbed her bag, clipped on his harness, and opened the car door. He jumped in without hesitation. Where? She whispered as they pulled out of the driveway. He didn't give directions, not in the way humans do. But he guided her with posture, body language, tiny gestures. When she turned the wrong way, he tensed. When she veered toward the right direction, his tail thumped once. Mile by mile, they left the town behind. The roads narrowed. Forest swallowed the last signs of civilization. And finally, after nearly an hour, they arrived. A remote hiking trail. One car. Empty. No sign of its owner. Someone's out there, Rebecca realized. She called emergency services immediately. I think someone's lost, she said. My dog led me here. There was a beat of silence on the line before the dispatcher replied. Search teams were just being deployed. We have a missing person report. Diabetic male, early 30s. No one knew where he went hiking today. But Atlas had known. When the call ended, he took off. No leash, no scent tracking, just unwavering purpose. Rebecca followed, trusting him completely. 2 miles in, Through tangled brush and hidden game trails, they found him. A man lay unconscious in a shallow ravine, skin pale, lips cracked. His glucose monitor lay broken beside him. He had wandered off trail after becoming disoriented from low blood sugar. Fallen. And had no way to call for help. He'd been there all night. "How did you find me?" he whispered hoarsely as Rebecca knelt beside him and administered a glucose injection. "No one knew where I was going." She didn't answer. She didn't have to. Atlas sat quietly nearby, eyes scanning the woods, as if still guarding the man. The rescue team arrived minutes later. "Another 10 hours, one medic said. He wouldn't have survived the night." The man turned to Rebecca as they loaded him into the stretcher. "Your dog saved my life." And Rebecca, her hand resting on Atlas's back, simply said, "I know." 6 months after the fall, Atlas was no longer the gangly puppy that had tumbled off Riverside Bridge. He was growing into a magnificent adolescent German shepherd, his coat rich and glossy, his gait powerful and fluid, his body still catching up to the force of what lived inside him. He moved with confidence. Not cockiness, purpose. He still had the heart of a playful companion. He still loved chasing balls, nosing open treat drawers, and flopping on the couch with a dramatic sigh. But when the moment called for it, when someone needed him, he changed. His eyes locked in. His entire body aligned. And what emerged wasn't a pet. It was a force. Dr. Reeves had seen enough to know they were dealing with something unprecedented. She brought in specialists, neuroscientists, animal behaviorists, even theoretical physicists, to observe Atlas. They ran quiet, non-invasive tests. They watched. They measured. And time after time, their instruments confirmed one thing. Nothing made sense. Atlas could detect electromagnetic shifts far subtler than any dog, or instrument, was capable of sensing. He could perceive biochemical changes in living beings before those beings showed symptoms. He could react to events not as they unfolded, but before they occurred. "His neural scans don't match anything we've documented," Dr. Reeves told Rebecca, laying out the most recent results. "His brain's connectivity has reorganized. It's not just enhanced, it's different." "Like he evolved?" Rebecca asked. "Or like something unlocked," Reeves said. Theories emerged. Some suggested the trauma of the fall triggered latent abilities. Others believed it had rerouted his brain's sensory processing. But the truth was, none of them had seen anything like it. "It's like his, seeing through time," one researcher remarked during a session. "Not predicting the future. Experiencing it, slightly ahead of us." Rebecca thought back to that moment on the riverbank. The branch that moved against the current. The way Atlas knew what was coming before anyone else. "It's not just sight or smell," she said. "It's something else. Something we don't have words for." Reeves nodded, her voice low with awe. "He's not perceiving the world like we do. He's perceiving everything." It began on a quiet autumn morning. Rebecca awoke to find Atlas already sitting beside her bed. Alert, eyes steady, posture eerily focused. Not playful. Not restless. Present. "What is it, boy?" she asked, instantly on edge. Atlas turned, walked to the door, and looked back. She grabbed her gear, no hesitation now, not after everything they'd experienced, and followed him outside. The neighborhood was still, windless, peaceful. But Atlas wasn't looking at anything nearby. He faced the mountains to the west, his body taut, ears forward, as if listening to something too quiet for any human ear. Rebecca followed his gaze. "Show me," she said. An hour later, they arrived at a remote trailhead. One vehicle. No hikers in sight. Atlas leapt from the car, barely waiting for her to catch up. The pattern was all too familiar now. He wasn't sniffing the ground. He wasn't tracking with scent. He was moving with knowledge. 2 miles up the trail, deep in the trees, they found her, a wildlife photographer who had slipped off a ridge while trying to photograph eagles. Her ankle was broken. Her phone shattered. No one knew she was even there. "How did you find me?" she asked as Rebecca splinted the injury and radioed for help. "I wasn't supposed to be here. I didn't tell anyone." She was shivering, drifting in and out of consciousness. In one lucid moment, she whispered something strange. I pictured a dog coming to help me. A German shepherd. I don't know why. I just kept holding that image, hoping it would come true. Rebecca stared at her. The woman had never seen Atlas, didn't know his story, and yet, she had called to him. When she told Dr. Reeves what the woman said, the researcher went completely still. "That changes everything," she whispered. "If that's true, we're not just looking at a dog who can perceive distress. We're looking at a consciousness bridge." Reeves expanded her study. This wasn't just about heightened senses anymore. It was about shared awareness, about response to focused intention. Atlas wasn't just reading the world. He was connecting to the minds within it. From then on, Reeves began testing a hypothesis that straddled the line between science and something more. Could directed thought, intentional emotion, be guiding him? Atlas continued to demonstrate one extraordinary rescue after another. But now, with each event, the question echoed louder. Was he sensing emergencies, or answering silent calls for help? 1 year to the day after Atlas's fall, the river shimmered under a late spring sun, quiet, peaceful, as if nothing had ever happened. But for Rebecca, the memory still pulsed like a second heartbeat. She and Atlas walked together along the riverbank. Beside them, Dr. Reeves flipped through her field notebook, documenting a full year of unprecedented findings, hundreds of recorded instances of Atlas's abilities. 17 distinct perceptual expansions, she said softly. Some we don't even have terminology for. Rebecca nodded but didn't speak. She was watching Atlas. The dog had grown into a striking, confident German shepherd. The floppy ears were gone. The oversized paws now carried him with silent, deliberate grace. But something in his eyes remained unchanged. That sense of knowing. As they walked, Atlas began to pull, subtly but insistently, toward the bridge. "He wants to go back," Rebecca murmured. "To the spot where it all began," Reeves said, hesitating. "Are you sure that's a good idea? It could trigger a trauma response." But Rebecca had long since learned to trust Atlas. They followed his lead up the winding path, toward the pedestrian walkway of Riverside Bridge. The repairs from the fall were still visible, new railings, reinforced supports. Atlas showed no fear, no hesitation. He walked directly to the place where, 1 year earlier, he had slipped through a gap and plummeted into the river below. He sat calm, watchful, listening to something no one else could hear. "What are you sensing?" Rebecca asked, kneeling beside him. And then, he moved. Slowly, with absolute intention, Atlas placed his paw over Rebecca's heart and looked into her. Not at her. Through her. And everything changed. The world around her seemed to tilt, not violently, but as if a new layer had peeled back. Rebecca gasped. She could feel everything. The swirling energy beneath the bridge. The micro-movements of fish in the current. The faint electric pulses in the trees nearby. The rhythm of insects in the soil. The living hum of the earth, vibrating as a single organism. When it ended, it took her breath with it. She sat back, overwhelmed, trembling. What was that? Reeves asked, rushing over. Rebecca, are you all right? I felt it, she whispered. I saw how he sees. I felt what he feels. Atlas looked at her, still and calm. Then, he turned to Dr. Reeves, walked forward, and gently placed his paw against her hand. The connection formed again. The scientist's eyes widened. Her breath caught. A moment later, tears streamed silently down her face. He's not just perceiving the world in a different way, she said, voice breaking. He's sharing it. He's building a bridge between minds. The very same bridge where his life should have ended had become the place where an entirely new reality began. In the months that followed, Atlas's abilities weren't just observed, they were applied. Working under strict ethical protocols created by Rebecca and Dr. Reeves, Atlas began collaborating with emergency teams, medical professionals, and research scientists. His shared perception didn't just guide rescues, it revolutionized them. He could sense structural weaknesses in buildings before engineers did. Detect cardiac arrhythmias before any monitor beeped. Lead first responders to victims buried under rubble, with no visible or auditory clues. In time-sensitive crises, Atlas became the factor that changed outcomes from tragedy to survival. On his second birthday, the governor honored him with a special commendation, an award typically reserved for decorated service animals. The medal, fitted to his collar, gleamed beneath the fading evening light as applause rippled through the crowd. Atlas sat quietly beside Rebecca, unfazed by the attention, eyes on the horizon. He wasn't performing for the world. He was watching it. That night, as the sun bled into the river, Rebecca and Atlas returned to their quiet routine. No lights, no cameras, just the woman who had raised him, and the puppy who had fallen and come back, changed. He curled beside her as she sat on the porch, her hand resting on his strong shoulder. You weren't supposed to survive, she whispered. But maybe you didn't just survive. She looked out toward the distant outline of Riverside Bridge, no longer just a place of trauma, but a sacred marker. Maybe you were always meant to fall. Atlas looked up at her, and in his amber eyes, there was something deeper than comprehension. There was recognition, a silent acknowledgement that some stories don't end when they should. Some stories begin exactly where they weren't supposed to. And sometimes, the fall isn't the end. It's the moment the world changes. If this story gave you chills, you're not alone. Atlas's journey is a reminder that the impossible isn't always fiction, and that the bond between animals and humans might go deeper than we understand. Share this with someone who needs a little hope. Like if you believe in more than coincidence. Subscribe for more real-life miracles that defy the ordinary. And tell us in the comments, what do you think Atlas brought back from the river?